Today, we are here to talk to you, Amanda and I. We're delighted to talk to you about the topic of balanced leadership. We have a great deal of interest in it. And before we get into the topic itself, just a brief word about who we are. Insight Experience is focused on helping leading companies develop their leadership and execute strategy. And our focus in doing that is experience-based learning. We create dynamic simulation-based experiences, group-based experiences that are unique in that they show the impact of leadership on business results and connect those two features. We're a global company. We work across a range of industries, across all levels of management, Fortune 500 to 1,000 clients. And we've been doing it for about 15 years. And in that, we have worked with over 40,000 participants at thousands of programs and with scores of clients. And we've been lucky enough over those 15 years to see some really interesting patterns emerge in the leaders that we work with and in the organizations that we work with. And we've developed some clear points of view about strategy and about the leader's role in execution and what constitutes effective leadership in organizations today. We focus our energy in particular on 4 core leadership challenges. And these challenges are aligned to particular critical points of growth in leaders' development and have some affinity to levels in organizations, as you can see from developing first-level leaders and then at more executive levels in a focus on strategic perspective. These are linked to our organization's challenges that we work with, and particularly to businesses today in complex, volatile global environments. So the context for these challenges in which we work is reflected in our simulation and experiential work, and is really focused on today's marketplace dynamics and organizational challenges. So we're excited to be here with you. And as I said, we do have some points of view about leadership and execution. And to kick that off, I'm going to turn things over to Amanda to frame today's conversation. Amanda?
Today, now hopefully a little bit more audibly, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. First, we want to share with you this idea of balanced leadership, and then we want to give you an opportunity in a very brief, abbreviated fashion to experience this idea in practice. And we'd like to then give you the opportunity to give you some pointers and tools to take away from the session, and then we'll save some time to answer your questions. So we're going to do those 3 things. It's not easy to be a leader. All of you who are on the phone who manage organizations and lead teams, those of you who help people in those roles to do that better, know that great leadership advice can be really tough to follow. You'll hear things like, create a powerful vision, but don't mess up the details. Deliver results for your product, your team, your organization, but make sure that you support all the demands of corporate for time and attention and activity. Build employee engagement, but at the same time, make sure that you deliver results quicker than ever. Those kind of demands, those kind of tensions are where leaders live in today's corporate environment. And it's really tough to balance them. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about balance is that you can't be balanced if you're at rest. You actually have to be in motion, and leaders have to drive the balance in their leadership and leadership approach, even as there's an enormous swirl of activity around them and in the face of a lot of the change that Nick mentioned. So, in fact, to paraphrase a great physicist, Albert Einstein said, life is like riding a bicycle. Well, we'd change that a little bit to say leadership is like riding a bicycle. In order to keep your balance, you must keep moving. This isn't a new idea. It's a tension that leaders have lived in for from the get-go. And in fact, it's work that as we look at people who have studied this, Barry Johnson wrote a book in 1975 where he defined this tension as polarities and managing polarities. And the way he defined this tension is as two poles, interdependent pairs, in fact, that support a common purpose. You can't choose to lean towards one or the other. You have to balance them. So, and the best illustration of that, or the simplest illustration of that, is customer satisfaction and cost. We want to deliver what our customers want, but we have to manage our costs to ensure that we do that profitably and sustainably. That's a great example of a leadership polarity in practice. Leaders see those every day in a wide range. They manage a great number of polarities very well, whether it's global and local, being focused or delivering breadth, innovation and efficiency, the aligning and engaging your team managed against the time it takes to achieve that, the impact of making large investments and being sure that and confident that you'll deliver a return, even at the very personal level, balancing the needs of self and the needs of a larger group, whether it's your team or your function or your organization or your company. Leaders are always managing a broad range of polarities on a day-to-day basis. We put leaders into our business simulations and challenge them to make strategic decisions in very short periods of time, and what we see is those polarities start to show up very visibly. And in our work, what we've identified and observed is that three particular dimensions really separate leaders who are able to be successful from the rest of the group. There are three dimensions that we have now started to focus on in our work and our coaching with other leaders as the dimensions of balanced leadership. These dimensions are those polarities that if leaders can keep a balanced perspective on both ends of the poles, they will improve their ability to make effective decisions and take their organizations in new directions and deliver their results. So let me walk you through those three domains, those three dimensions. First, the dimension of orientation. It's the vertical here. Whether you are oriented in your thinking externally, focused on customers, competitors, market dynamics, or whether you've turned your lens and your orientation internally and are thinking about and focused on the dynamics in your team and your organization, or cross the boundaries in your organization necessary to deliver results. So that where do you look is the first dimension. The second dimension is the dimension of how do you understand a situation? What skills do you bring to bear? Do you dig into the numbers and bring a highly analytical approach to the issues that you face? Or do you bring a more interpersonal, engaged response to understanding the human dynamics of the situations or the challenges that are on your plate as a leader? You can think about, even with these two dimensions, how some of the leaders that you know operate closer to one or the other of these poles as their place of comfort. But there's a third dimension that we add to this as we think about balanced leadership that really helps leaders expand their perspective about the issues they face, and that's the dimension of your horizon. Are you oriented to thinking about the long-term vision, potential, opportunity, the point that you're headed towards as a leader? Or are you oriented to thinking about the tactical, what's happening today dimension of activity that would lead you to be able to deliver on that vision? It's these 6 poles, the 3 dimensions that we focus on here of orientation, approach, and horizon, that we find are really powerful for leaders to understand about themselves and to manage intentionally as they want to be better and more effective leaders. In our simulations, we see how hard that is to do. In fact, our simulations really pull people to the poles as they engage in a time-compressed experience. For example, we give participants an extensive amount of information to digest in a short period of time about the marketplace, about the organization, about what's happening in the business. And we see some people who gravitate to that outside-in view, to want to understand what's happening with the competition, with their customers, as their entry place to the business. We see other people who really gravitate to information about the organization and use that as a way to start to understand what's happening in the business. It is always fascinating to us that in every simulation experience that we teach, where we give groups of participants identical information, they inevitably interpret and read and make considered and thoughtful leadership decisions about that information differently. And it's related to where they are on these poles and domains of balanced leadership. We see leaders who are pulled to the poles and dividing their approach to the information between the folks who dig into the numbers, who don't feel comfortable unless they've really digested analytically, not just the financials, but the operating performance of the business. It's all about the data. We see participants whose eyes glaze over when they look at those reports, who don't feel confident about making their leadership choices until they've heard from their simulation characters, until they've engaged with and heard the personal perspectives that individual employees or customers or stakeholders have about a problem or an issue. So we see participants who really vary in their approach. Lastly, we see across teams a wide range of approaches to this dimension of horizon. We see participants who are deeply tactical, who could spend an extraordinary amount of time and attention and energy focused on how they manage their day timer, as well as making detailed decisions of the business, and some who want to focus big picture on the vision and where the business is headed. In fact, this poll can be so seductive that sometimes people will get so stuck in the tactical that they'll even forget to articulate their vision to their team in the simulation experience. We know and we see that all leaders struggle with gravitational pull. Being pulled to the poles is that gravitational pull, and it can come from a variety of sources. It can come from your individual profile, how you are wired and think about issues. We also see gravitational pull in the culture of companies. We see some companies that are highly analytical, and leaders who've grown up there by default are pulled to the gravity of the analytical poles. Others who are highly visionary and really don't align or commit to a new idea unless somebody can powerfully articulate the vision associated with it. So gravitational pull can come from who you are, where you work, the situation that you're in. And it can sometimes result in some real challenges in terms of the decisions that you make and how you frame decisions. For example, if you're very analytical and looking to address a simulation issue, and this we see in our experience, you dig into the numbers, you come up with what you think is a great solution to the problem, but in fact, you may end up with an organization and employees that look like this because you've overworked them, they don't understand what's happening. You may have an incredible backlash on the interpersonal side. It may be, for some organizations, they spend a lot of time articulating their vision, helping really create something that's highly compelling and engaging for their employees. They create a real staircase to the future, but they don't think about the tactics of how to get their employees onto that staircase. So they're kind of stuck with a place to go and no way to get there. Perhaps most frequently, we see teams that will get very focused on a particular issue or opportunity inside their organization or within their current scope of work, and they'll completely miss a new business opportunity or something outside the scope of their current frame. we see these stories play out in leaders in our simulations, and we hear about them from leaders in their day-to-day work. And it's not unreasonable. It's part of how we're wired.
So thanks, Amanda. Really some interesting thoughts about bias and frame. So I want to just take a minute and dig into this issue of bias and frame. And this is an interesting graphic that some of you may have seen from David Rock and his work combining neuroscience and leadership in his neuroleadership group. And what this graph tells us is about what tends to happen to leaders as they become more senior in organizations. As you can see, the lines going down to the right, the green and red lines, are the level of importance of your technical skills, and interestingly, your capacity for self and social awareness. At the same time, the blue line is rising. In other words, as you become more senior in organizations, your technical skills become less important in terms of what you really need to get ahead, but your self and social awareness becomes more important, and yet it's really challenging for leaders to focus on that. It gets crowded out by the complexity of their work, by the things that got them to where they are, and this creates an imbalanced situation when, in fact, they need to rebalance differently. So that's what happens from a neuroleadership perspective, but if we go one level deeper into what's going on in the brain, there's something even more interesting at work. Our brains are wired to respond to threat to move away from things before we move toward things. And threat and uncertainty take a lot of forms in our complex world today, but ambiguity and uncertainty, complexity, time stresses, pressures, all those things create, from our brain's perspective, a series of threats and uncertainties. What happens in the wiring of our brains is it actually creates a reduced field of view. It reduces our working memory. It actually reduces the insights we're able to generate and the ideas for action, and our brains continue to generate more stress responses in response to the stress responses. So it can turn into a really vicious cycle when under pressure what you need is expanded and balanced thinking, and what your brain is doing is closing down on you into the things that you already, that you default to as your default behaviors. So we have to recognize we can't control this. It's happening in our brains, but we can become more aware of it. And the key, as Amanda said, is to think about it not as where are we or where should we be, but to think about it in terms of balance. If you get imbalanced, it can lead to outcomes that are less than perfect and less than what leaders really need to achieve in order to be effective. So let's put this into a little context. If you think about this concept of balancing the poles and why it's important because we as leaders do three fundamental things, one could argue. As managers in business, as people in business, we understand and take in information and come to conclusions about that information to make decisions, and then we're held accountable to the execution of those decisions, often through others. A lot of focus goes on decision making, is focused on the actual art of decision making. But what we believe is that what is often underserved is the other two activities here, the before and after, the how you take in the information, what you understand, and how you execute. It's in those dimensions that having balance is particularly critical, because I'm sure you can think of an example where assaulted with a whole barrage of data, you may have focused in a particular area that is comfortable to you to analyze, and then left something on the table that led you to a decision that wasn't ideal. Similarly, in execution, perhaps it was a brilliant visionary plan, but you didn't step back and think about all the critical steps and stakeholders necessary to actually execute effectively. So again, the balance between the different poles becomes really important in the execution as well as the understanding of the situation. Now, of course, that becomes even harder to do, as we just said, when you're in a high-paced, stressful environment with a lot going on and a lot spinning around you. And that's, in fact, what we create in our business simulation experiences. So we thought today it would be interesting to, rather than just say what's easy to say but hard to do, but let's actually just give it a try. So here's the situation I want to put you into. You are faced with a simulation challenge here today, and you're stepping into the role of general manager of a global business. Congratulations, you're in the blue box. You have 3 people reporting to you and a large organization underneath each of them, Tom, Cindy, and Vladimir. There is a range of challenges that you are dealing with when you step into this role. You're in a technology business, and you were a once dominant pioneer, but now you're under intense competitive pressure. You were the market leader in your traditional segment, but a late entrant into the growth market, and that's demanding investment from you. Your product is lagging, honestly, in both technology and quality, and that's driving costs up, and revenue is not responding, which is putting your margins under pressure. To top that off, your employees, frankly, are kind of disengaged, and they're dealing with heavy workloads as they're trying to manage all these different dynamics in the business. With that context, you have limited time to make a broad set of strategic and operational decisions about the business in a group of people in about 2 hours or less, with a lot of information, as Amanda mentioned before, about setting direction, about where you're going to spend your time and your money, about the strategic investments you're going to make and the product development work you need to do. And in the midst of all that, with all of those pressures and all of those different viewpoints, which may sound familiar to you, an issue pops up. So here's your issue. Vladimir, your technical lead, has come to you and said, we have a process improvement opportunity in new account installation. I'm really excited about it. It's going to shift our non-technical installation tasks to the call center. Cindy, your call center lead, is opposed to this. Vlad has announced plans to move ahead because he's very confident in the plan, but Cindy has objected strongly and asked you as the general manager to intervene. So got the picture? These 2 leaders, of course, are seeing it very differently. What Vlad says is, great idea, has obvious merits, needs no further analysis, let's go.
Well, that's a half-baked idea. There's really not a clear business case for that.
Yeah, but look, it'll free my people up to do critical development work, and that's our strategic priority. Everybody knows that in the business. We have to execute on that.
Honestly, my people aren't trained for this work. Shifting a burden to my overworked team does not seem like a good solution to me.
Yeah, but look, Cindy, this is a small change for a big return. We have to make this happen.
The installation process is a critical customer touch point. I don't think we want to put it at risk. We can't afford to make mistakes with that process.
Yeah, but it gets our call center people, your people, closer to our customers. That's a good thing in terms of managing relationships.
Vlad, look, I know you're trying to push this through without my support. I can tell what you're trying to do here.
So, that's the situation. Vlad and Cindy disagree. A question for you now is, what do you ask the team to do first? Do you want them to go back and better define the skill requirements and the organizational impact of this change? Assess the impact of the change on customers and what your competitors are doing? Do you want them to go back and develop a business case on the costs and benefits of the proposal? Do you want Vlad and Cindy to share their perspectives and begin to address their working relationship? Do you think a project plan is the next step to understand the impacts of implementation over the next 2 quarters? Or do you want people to step back and envision the process, bigger picture for next generational technical service and how the customer experience might actually be redefined as part of this process? What do you do first? Andrew, let's take a poll and see what people are thinking about how they'd respond to this situation.
Certainly, Nick, it would be my pleasure. So HCI members, if you could, take a moment and think through these various choices. Let's decide which of these is the best option, in your opinion, as to how to resolve this issue. So as we leave this open for just a few moments, I think we'll learn a little bit to see what sort of leads the way in terms of the general consensus of folks here. So I'm going to keep it open for just a few more moments. Quickly, we have better define the skill requirements, assess the impact, develop a business case, share the perspectives, create a project plan, or envision the process. So as these results come trickling in, I think what we can do is at least make them all public to you. We'll leave it open as folks come in, but here now as we are seeing these results, Nick and Amanda, I'd love for you to comment a little bit regarding the choices here.
That sounds great. So as you could see, Andrew, there was a lot of interest in this, in those choices, in creating the project plan, and I just want to make sure we can see those, Andrew. There we go. In creating a clear project plan, and in developing a business case. So the two leaders here are creating a project plan and developing a clear business case. So interesting, if we look at those questions, which were actually oriented on the dimensions of the polls that Amanda mentioned, we can look at how some of these questions actually align to the polls. So an orientation set of questions was the first two, better defining the skill requirements and assessing the impact on customers. There was a lot of energy around the approach, which is develop a business case around the approach poll, and also quite a bit of energy, and a number of you chose to create a project plan. So in the lower left quadrant, if you will, developing a big business case and creating a project plan both generated a lot of interest given the context we just gave you. So that's interesting. It's interesting as a group, and of course this is group results, not individual results. Your individual results, you can think of those in terms of the individual results you had, and each of those results in a simulation environment would have created a set of impacts on both the business and on the people. It's fun to think about exploring those impacts and what would happen next and what you would do next, and that's what we do in a full simulation environment. But here in this case, having had the majority of us choose some approach and horizon-based answers, let's look at what you learn next. So what you've learned as a result of this is that some complaints have actually surfaced from customers about the service attitudes of LAD's people. It turns out they are not very good with customers, and as people got into looking at the business case and the project plan, but also some of the other research, they've surfaced this piece of data. Another piece of market data has come up, which is that some of your key competitors have announced their work on a next-generation product release that will now allow customers to self-install and configure this service, may not need any intervention from either Vlad or Cindy's people. So that's an interesting piece of data and additional context to the situation. In the midst of all that, while you're up to that, there's a knock on your door, and in walks Terry Diamond, one of the highest potential managers, account managers that reports into Cindy, and she's got some things to say too. So, Andrew, I think you have Terry on file there. Could you let us know what Terry has to say?
Hi, have you got a minute? There's something I wanted to talk to you about. I just wanted to say that I think the proposal on the new account installation innovation is a really good idea, and I'd love to be involved with it. I've talked to some other people in the AMS department, and a couple of us are excited about it, but not everyone wants to speak up. It could be really great for engaging our customers sooner and getting to know them better, innovate in solving problems sooner, and it's a great opportunity, but unfortunately Cindy doesn't seem to be a big supporter of it. And, I thought about it, and I think it's just not her style. She likes to have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And, well, that's just not Vlad's style, I know. But I wanted to say that I hope they can work things out, because it's a really great idea. Thanks.
Okay. So Terry has some opinions about this subject and some additional context into the situation. So having read and heard what you've just read, then the question is, what decision would you make now? 3 big options would be proceed as Vlad has proposed, rock on, stop the work, and support Cindy's position on this, or maybe proceed with a pilot and kind of take an intermediate course. Well, the decision is interesting, but as we said, it's really not all about the decision. It's about the implementation and about how you approached it. So let's just assume that we're going to proceed with a pilot. We're making that decision for you. We do, however, want you to make another decision, which is assuming now that we are proceeding with a pilot, and we're now in execution. Let's take a poll and have you pick which priority would you choose first in execution of a pilot program. Would you establish clear leadership for the pilot and who is in charge, explaining the rationale for the change? Would you encourage the project team to include a target set of customers in the pilot design? That's B. Would you ensure that the team creates a measurement system to track progress and results? Would you coach Vlad and Cindy on their relationship, which clearly has some issues? Would you review the project plan and engage Cindy in the planning process? Or would you first ask the project lead to step back and think about designing for the future as well as present needs? What would you do? And Andrew, I can see the polls, the numbers are rolling in already. Let's take a moment or two for them to settle out, and then we'll push ahead. Okay. Looks like we have a pretty clear winner. I'm gonna move ahead here, and Andrew, let's show those results. The first clear winner was to establish clear leadership for the pilot, explain the rationale for the change to both functional groups, and then there were some of you that thought it was important to look at your target customers and to coach Vlad and Cindy. So the first 3 in particular, establishing clear leadership, including a target set of customers, and creating a clear measurement system are where we're seeing the most traction. So very interesting. And the question then we have for you in looking at those results and thinking about what you decided is, did you gravitate to the same poll? If your first decision was primarily about Horizon, was your second decision also about Horizon? If it was about, in the first round, if it was about measuring results and having a clear plan and developing a business case, were you still on the blue poll and in measuring results in the second? If you were on the same poll and you made essentially the same kind of decision both times as an individual, then one of the things you might want to recognize, there could be risks in your profile. You might have a tendency towards one of these polls that is worth stepping back and taking a look at. Of course, the question is that you need to understand why you're gravitating towards whatever polls you're gravitating towards and have that awareness and what the circumstances are, because when you understand that, that can help you manage your own leadership risk if you're out of balance. And then finally, as a team, we're a big group of individuals here. If we were making this decision as a management or a lead team, we might have some bias as a team that might cause us, in fact, to over tilt in one direction or another. And we often see this in our simulation work, that teams may bias a particular area given their team culture or the organization's culture and over-tilt in one direction, and that can produce some unexpected results as a result of that imbalance in their approach and in their execution. So what's the point here? The point is when you move on these ends of the spectrum and across the poles, you want to tilt intentionally rather than by default. You don't want your unconscious bias to take over and push you into an area that's only your comfort zone and that might close out a broader set of decisions and opportunities, and it might improve the effectiveness of your execution. You see a gyroscope on the screen here, and that's because the gyroscope image is something, when we get out of balance, helps give us some centrifugal feedback to say, hey, you need to think about getting back to the middle, or at least recognize that you're way out on the skinny branches here. That may be appropriate, but why don't you just test the other pole and make sure that it is appropriate, in fact, where you are. So that's easy to say, but and it's hard to do. We put people in these high-context simulation environments and dial up the pressure so that this will show up, and we can show them the business results of doing that. But beyond the simulation environment, back at work, it's a real challenge. How do you help your leaders develop and build balance? And Amanda, I'm going to turn that question over to you.
Thanks, Nick. It is a real challenge to think about how can you build balance, given that naturally we gravitate to the poles. You can't necessarily go to the leadership gym, but in many ways you can. When we work with leaders who, as a result of a simulation experience, understand that they have a gravitational pull in one direction or another, we help them to work through and use 3 specific tools to help them build balance. The first is simply to build their awareness, to understand, based on making decisions like you just made about Vlad and Cindy, where do you gravitate? How do you work to understand issues? Where might your blind spots be? There's a number of research studies that have proven that self-awareness is the single greatest lever that leaders have to improve their performance, and that's true in all arenas, but particularly around this idea of balanced leadership. So the first tool is to know where you are, to build awareness. The second is to recognize that you can't necessarily, very few of us, can build balance on our own. You need to partner with intention. You need to have someone or someones who can partner with you to build these skills and help you demonstrate these skills. And we see that time and again in simulation teams as leaders with different strengths partner to achieve something beyond their individual capabilities. Third, we help leaders think about how you build habit. How do you create prompts and habits that enable you to be more balanced than you would be if you were not conscious and focused on it? The use of all of those tools requires practice. You get better, you build your muscles, just like going to the gym, if you use these tools more repetitively and practice them in, as Nick said, a high-context environment. So let's just talk briefly as we wrap up today about what those 3 tools look like. As you think about building awareness, you can do that in a couple of ways. The first is simply to observe and reflect for yourself. As you now think about these 3 domains, and they're simple, you can keep them in mind and start to pay attention to where you gravitate, and when you're challenged, what happens? Both where do you go, and what is it that happens that challenges you and pulls you towards one pole or another? So observe and reflect. Secondly, ask your peers, ask for feedback. It's not just your own sense of recognition of yourself, but the things that you can't see about what you do that can provide valuable insight and awareness for where you are. So ask for feedback from teams and peers to help debrief both your interactions, that information gathering, as well as your decisions. Third, you can take an assessment. You can do that for yourself. You can ask others to assess you and give you feedback as a way to provide some data to help you understand where you are. With that perspective, then partner. Really value diversity of thought. There's an enormous volume of literature and research at this point about the power of diversified teams and diversified thinking. And we see this play out in balanced leadership, in leadership partnerships through history. You think about partnering the vision of Michael Dell with the operational excellence of Kevin Rollins to bring Dell's original vision to market that really married that vision and tactical perspective. If you think about Anne Mulcahy's turnaround at Xerox and her deep interpersonal understanding and approach to the organization, partnered with Ursula Burns' analytics and understanding of the complex financial and operational challenges that Xerox faced at the time. Partnering and reaching out to others to help you be able to be a more balanced leader is a second tool that you could use. The third is building habit. Developing ways to remind yourself to operate outside your area of comfort, whether it's gathering additional information, intentionally taking in information that will balance your gravity. If you are deep in the numbers, schedule time and go out and talk with people in the business. If you're deep inside, figure out a way to talk to customers. So intentionally balance your pole. Schedule time to do it. Increasingly, as our email boxes get fuller and our Twitters get longer, we need to find a way to use that scarce, valuable resource, our time, to help us be a more effective leader. So schedule time to focus on the pole you neglect intentionally. Thirdly, you could develop a checklist or simply a check habit to commit to test yourself before each major decision or action. Have you really considered both poles in practice? This idea of balanced leadership makes a difference, and we see it in our simulations as people put balanced leadership into practice. The simulation world or any kind of practice field lets you build skills because you focus your attention on the topic. It reinforces your behaviors. It lets you practice this idea in the face of the complexity that you face back on the job as opposed to facing a single challenge. In a simulation environment, we find it's particularly powerful because you're practicing your balanced leadership in parallel with other teams, and so you can compare their results. Wouldn't it have been fun today to be able to see the results of all the choices that you made on this webinar? And lastly, practice builds confidence. So whether you do it in a simulation or on the job, practicing and paying attention to your balanced leadership develops your skills. We've shared a lot of thoughts with you today, but at its core is this idea that leaders achieve better results when they balance the poles of each domain for any decision or interaction that they take on. That ultimately that well-rounded, integrated, holistic view of the issues that you face serves any organization or team well. I'll leave you with this thought because we're really interested in the idea of balance in leadership, that the true challenge of balanced leaders is that you don't balance one dimension. You don't balance one issue. Your life as a leader looks a little bit like this graphic. You're constantly balancing multiple issues layered one on top of another. And as I said, we're interested in this topic. We're interested in your thoughts on this topic. We are blogging and tweeting about this topic, but would love to hear from you. So with that as the end of our formal presentation, I'll open things up for questions, not just here, but I'd also encourage you to reach out to us after this webinar. So Andrew, do we have some questions that people have asked?
Amanda, thank you so much. I do have some questions. I just want to, before we get to them, I want to thank you and Nick and everyone at Insight Experience for sharing this presentation with our members today. I think there was a lot of really good insights to come out of it, as well as to put it into practice like that. I think that was a lot of fun for our members, and I really appreciate you sort of sharing your beliefs and your philosophies with us today. So let's get to some of these questions. Before I get to them, I want to remind our members that if you've yet to submit a question, please do so using the chat box. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have remaining, but as Amanda alluded to, if you reach out to them offline, I'm sure they're happy to answer more specific questions that you might have. If you do use the chat box, please feel free to attach your name so that we can respond accordingly. In the event that we don't have enough time, I can always pass your question on to our presenters. So I think one of the first things that to come to mind here is, a lot of our own webcasts here at HCI, some of our research, as well as some of the topics that we cover, focuses on strengths-based leadership. And I'm just curious to know if this model of balanced leadership contradicts some of the theories around strengths-based leadership.
Great. Hey, Andrew, it's Nick. I'll take that one. It's very interesting to think about that. We actually have folks in our organization who have background at Gallup, and we work a lot with companies that do a lot of competency work, Zenger, Folkman, and others. And the short answer is it does not contradict strengths-based leadership. It's this notion of understanding and leveraging your strengths, and knowing that any strength carried too far can become a liability. And in strengths-based leadership, of course, there's also the question of disabling weaknesses. Not everyone has a disabling weakness, and it isn't just about that, but it is the notion that you want to leverage your strength, but you can leverage your strength in many ways. A strength may be around implementing change for people, but that implementation bias and focus may actually embrace a lot of the different poles in the way that you choose to leverage your strengths to implement change. Another thought about this, two other thoughts about it quickly. One is that strengths-based leadership is really particularly focused on skill sets and core competencies, and a lot of what we're talking about here in the balanced leader model is about a mindset. It's about leveraging your strengths, but looking more broadly at the spectrum of decisions you're making and applying your strengths through a broader mindset of the poles as Amanda laid them out. And then finally, one last thought is that there are two kinds of ways to think about balance. One is at the individual level, and one is at the organization or team level. And they're both really important. As Amanda said, one of the ways to make the biggest impact in implementation and execution of strategy and in leveraging leadership is in the way you work in a team and partner-based environment. So you want to think of balancing the poles not only at an individual level, but at the group and organizational level. So those are a few thoughts on that. It's a great question, and I'm sure it's going to generate some ongoing discussion as we think about the intersection of those two schools of thought.
Thank you, Nick. That's a great answer to that. I think it is a really interesting discussion and one that could provide fodder for, as you mentioned, lots of ongoing discussion around that. Another question that we have is whether or not you see differences in balanced leadership profiles among leaders from different functional areas. So is that more of a natural tendency to have differences among the profiles for perhaps someone in finance versus someone who's doing more sales or customer service? Tell us a little bit about some of those archetypes, if you will.
Thanks, Andrew. It's Amanda. I'll answer that one. We do see, and I think it's understandable. We see that folks in various functions often gravitate towards some of the poles that you might expect. So finance folks gravitate towards an analytical pole. That's part of how they understand the dynamics of a business. HR people sometimes gravitate towards more of an interpersonal pole. And And yet, at the same time, what we also see is that folks in those disciplines who can bring the alternate perspective, the one that is perhaps distinct from what is expected in that function, can be some of the most valuable. So a finance person who can appreciate and help think through the organizational implications of the choices that they're presented with or the investments that they're considering. An HR person who can be a business partner to the business and really help craft a successful business case even for a soft investment can be particularly powerful and useful to helping the organization achieve its results. There are a couple of the domains of balanced leadership, both orientation and horizon, that are really universal. It doesn't matter what function you're in, but in some cases it matters how senior you are as a leader. More junior leaders can often tend to be somewhat more tactical because of the nature of their work and focused on the short term. But ultimately, leaders who are successful in moving up in their organizations really have to balance that domain of orientation and horizon in order to bring their organizations along. So I guess that the short answer is we see some predictable differences, but this idea of balancing is applicable regardless of what function you come from.
Thank you, Amanda. Now we've got a comment here coming in from one of our members, and I think it's interesting because I think it brings a lot of additional sort of questions and concepts to light. And so this person, I'll read it in its context, and I'll kind of explain a little bit what I got out of it. So this member says, I often get caught saying it depends. For me, this is a great discussion because at the very least, leaders might increase their ability to explain their rationale. An example would be when an employee points out that we did it differently last time. So my question around this, or just sort of a comment, is: do you see that embracing this balanced leadership approach allows for those within positions of leadership to better be able to empathize or to be able to explain some things and promote the transparency and the type of alignment between business goals and employee motivations and engagement and performance that is so often talked about as a desired state for organizations today?
Yeah, what a great comment. I really like this because it speaks to the context of individual situations, and all of leadership is situational, right? So if an organization is struggling under really immense competitive pressures and has to take action, decisive action in the given quarter to really fix some core parts of the business, there may be some things that have caused situationally that organization to really have to tilt towards a more tactical or a short-term horizon because of market pressures. When in fact, and the ability of the leader to frame the decision and saying, here are the things that are pulling us towards a shorter-term view and pole. And here's why it's so important to put that in the context of the longer term, because otherwise people are going to feel beaten down in that situation and say, I am so tired of the quarterly Olympics and doing things that don't feel like they're in the best interest of the business. If a leader can't actually frame the larger pole and the short term in the context of the longer term, these short-term changes are needed for survival so that we can get to the long-term vision we all want together. It really hampers your ability to get things done, and it makes the whole world feel too situational. So in fact, the role of the balanced leader model here is to help put a bigger frame on, explain the context for the existing decision, but put a bigger frame on it so that we can all get to a common place. I don't know if that helps, but I think it's a terrific question.
I like that answer, Nick. I definitely think it does help to put it into perspective, because when you do take that broader perspective towards an individual issue, it does help to explain, these are the reasons why we're doing this. And I know that from a micro level, it might not make sense. You might not agree with it, but look at the big picture here. I think you might see it differently. So I'll wrap it up with this last question, and I think this is an interesting one, and that is, what do you see as being, if any, a correlation between personality assessments and then this balanced leadership model?
Thanks, Andrew. That's also a really interesting question, and certainly personality assessments help you build your self-awareness, and they help you understand some of your natural tendencies. So, in and of just definitionally, they are helpful in understanding where you are on these poles. But I think it's also important to note that this model does not imply skills. It's about your mindset. It's about the mindset and approach that you bring to a problem, whether it's an external or internal, forward-looking or current, analytical or interpersonal. And so that mindset can be demonstrated in a wide range of personality types and profiles. So there's some correlation in some ways, but in many ways, those two sets of insights, what your personality type is against whatever model it is that you use, and this idea of intentionally being a balanced leader, are tools that go side by side to help leaders be more effective.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
I'd just add in closing.
Sure.
Andrew, I'd just add in closing that when we talked earlier in a slide about the two of the three critical decisions about organizing information and coming to conclusions about it, that's where that personality trait will come in, even in great clarity. And that's especially when you need, as we said, the broader perspective, the other poles, to make sure that you don't get overly focused on the details or live only in the big picture and don't provide enough clarity for those that need it in the organization.
That's a perfect way to cap it off, Nick. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank Nick Noyes and Amanda Young-Hickman for our featured presentation today, and of course to Insight Experience for making this all possible. We really appreciate you sharing this insight with our members. This has been fantastic material for everyone to sort of get a better idea of a really unique concept, and one that I think brings a lot of value to our own organizations back into the real world. So with that, I will conclude our presentation. I would like to extend one more thank you to Insight Experience and our presenters today, but I would be remiss if I didn't extend the biggest thank you of all to each and every one of our HCI members who have taken the time to spend an hour with us today. We really appreciate you folks doing that, and we always look forward to bringing you more content on hci.org. So with that, I will conclude our webcast and wish you all a great remainder of the week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.